The cost of mastery. Cassian stood in his apartment as dawn light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. He hadn't been home in 3 days. The familiar space felt alien now, as if he were a stranger visiting someone else's life. Elena moved through the small kitchen, making tea with practiced efficiency. She'd insisted on coming back with him after their second session in the warded chamber, refusing to let him be alone. The kettle's whistle pierced the silence. "You need to eat something," she said, not looking at him. "When did you last have a proper meal?" Cassian tried to remember. The answer eluded him, lost among the fragments of memory he'd burned as fuel. Yesterday? The day before? That's not an answer. Elena set a cup of tea in front of him, along with bread and cheese from his mostly empty cupboard. "Eat. Now." He picked up the bread mechanically. It tasted like ash in his mouth, but he forced himself to chew and swallow. Elena watched him with those green eyes that saw too much. "The veins are darker," she said quietly. "They've spread to your neck and your hands." Cassian looked down. The dark tracery beneath his skin had indeed spread, creeping like frost patterns across his fingers and wrists. When he focused, he could feel the corruption pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat, or what passed for his heartbeat now. The steady thump seemed slower, more distant, as if his body were becoming something separate from his consciousness. 2% per 30 seconds, he said. "That's sustainable. Mathematically, I can maintain a working for 25 minutes before reaching critical corruption levels. That's enough time to..." "Stop." Elena's voice cracked like a whip. "Stop talking about yourself like you're a problem to be solved with mathematics. You're not an equation, Cassian. You're a person who's burning pieces of his soul to fuel magic that's eating you alive." He met her gaze. "What would you have me do?" "I don't know." She wrapped her hands around her own teacup, knuckles white. "But I need you to acknowledge what's happening. You're not just learning to control this magic. You're becoming something else. Something that frightens me." The words hit harder than he expected. Cassian set down the bread, appetite gone. "I know. Do you?" Elena leaned forward. "Because when we were in that chamber, when you were channeling Void Flame for the second time, there was a moment where I didn't recognize you. Your eyes went completely black. Not just the pupils, everything. And you smiled, Cassian. You smiled like you were enjoying it." Memory flickered. The intoxicating rush of power, the sensation of reality bending to his will, the terrible joy of wielding magic that required no compromise, no negotiation with external forces, just pure manifestation of intent, paid for in pieces of himself he could barely remember losing. "I was," he admitted. "That's what the texts warned about. The soul bond makes it feel right, natural, like coming home." "Then we need to stop." Elena's voice was firm, or at least slow down. "You've been practicing for 3 days straight with barely any rest. Your body is shutting down, Cassian. You're not eating, you're not sleeping properly, and you're burning memories you can't get back. What happens when you've consumed so much of yourself that there's nothing left to anchor you?" Before he could answer, a sharp knock rattled the apartment door. They both froze. Another knock, more insistent. "Magister Netherbane, open the door." Mordain's voice. Cassian and Elena exchanged a glance. She started to rise, but Cassian waved her back and went to the door himself. The High Inquisitor stood in the narrow hallway, black robes immaculate despite the early hour. His gray eyes swept over Cassian, cataloging every visible change with practiced efficiency. "You look worse than yesterday," Mordain said without preamble. "May I come in?" Cassian stepped aside. Mordain entered, his presence seeming to fill the small apartment. His gaze landed on Elena, then on the teacup and untouched food. "Miss Brightwater, I see you're maintaining your vigil." There was no mockery in his tone, only acknowledgement. "That's wise. Someone needs to." "Why are you here?" Cassian asked. Mordain turned to face him fully. "Because the situation has escalated. Another wardstone failed 2 hours ago, the primary anchor for the Eastern District. That makes 4 failures in 3 days. At this rate, we have less than a week before the capital's defenses collapse entirely." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Less than a week. Cassian had known the timeline was tight, but hearing it stated so baldly made it real in a way that theoretical calculations hadn't. "The king has called an emergency council session for noon today," Mordain continued. He's going to order a conventional reinforcement of the remaining wards, pulling every available mage to shore up the defenses. It will fail, of course. Conventional magic only feeds the Voidweaver, as you've explained. But he refuses to see that. Then why tell me? Cassian asked. If the decision is already made, because you need to be ready. Mordain's voice dropped lower. When the reinforcement fails, and it will fail within hours of implementation, there will be panic, chaos. And in that chaos, someone will need to act. Someone who has the knowledge and the will to do what's necessary. Elena stood abruptly. You're asking him to become a traitor, to defy the king's direct orders and use forbidden magic in the field. I'm asking him to be ready to save the kingdom when conventional authority proves inadequate. Mordain's gaze didn't waver. There's a difference. Is there? Elena challenged. Because from where I'm standing, you're setting him up to take the fall for your failure to convince the king of the truth. A flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossed Mordain's weathered face. You're not wrong, Miss Brightwater. But consider this. If Magister Netherbane acts without authorization and succeeds, he'll be branded a criminal who violated the most sacred laws of the kingdom. If he waits for authorization that will never come, he'll watch the kingdom fall. Either way, he loses. The only question is whether the kingdom loses with him. Cassian felt the weight of those words settle into his bones. The High Inquisitor was right. There was no path forward that didn't end in his destruction. The only choice was whether that destruction would mean something. How much time do I have, Cassian asked, before the reinforcement attempt? The king will order it immediately after the council session, say 2 hours from now. The working itself will take another 3 to 4 hours to prepare and execute, so perhaps 6 hours total before the failure becomes apparent. 6 hours. Cassian's mind raced through the calculations. 6 hours to rest, to prepare, to steel himself for what would come after. And then, I need to practice more, he said. If I'm going to face the Voidweaver's corruption directly, I need to be able to maintain Void Flame for longer than 25 minutes. I need to push past the current limits. No, Elena's voice was sharp. Absolutely not. You're already at the edge of collapse. One more session could. Could what? Cassian turned to face her. Kill me? I'm already dying, Elena. Every time I use this magic, I burn away a little more of myself. The only question is whether I burn fast enough to be useful. Tears shone in her eyes, but her jaw was set. Then I'm coming with you. To the chamber. Right now. Mordain cleared his throat. Actually, that won't be possible. The archives are being sealed for the duration of the emergency. The king wants all sensitive materials secured before the crisis escalates further. You have perhaps 30 minutes before the wards lock down completely. Cassian's stomach dropped. The warded chamber, his only safe space to practice, about to become inaccessible. He looked at Mordain, searching for any sign that this was a test or a trap. However, Mordain continued, his voice carefully neutral, there is another location. The old Thornweave Catacombs beneath the palace. They were used during the original sealing 3 centuries ago, and the wards there are specifically designed to contain anathema-class workings. Very few people remember they exist, and fewer still have access. He produced a small iron key from within his robes and set it on the table. The entrance is through the palace crypts behind the tomb of King Aldrich II. The wards will recognize this key and grant passage. What you choose to do with that information is, of course, entirely your own decision. The key sat between them like a loaded weapon. Cassian stared at it, understanding the magnitude of what Mordain was offering. Official deniability maintained, but practical support provided. The High Inquisitor was walking a razor's edge between duty and necessity. Why? Cassian asked. Why help me like this? Mordain was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. Because 30 years ago, I watched a young magister die rather than use the knowledge that might have saved her. She refused to cross the line, even when crossing it was the only option. I held her as the corruption she'd fought consumed her anyway. Conventional magic pushed too far, too fast, trying to match power she couldn't reach through legitimate means. She died pure and useless. He moved toward the door, then paused. I won't watch that happen again, not when the stakes are this high. His gray eyes met Cassian's. But understand this, If you use that key, if you practice in those catacombs, you're accepting that there's no path back. The moment you deploy this magic in the field, I will hunt you. That's not a threat. It's a promise. My duty requires it. I know, Cassian said quietly. Mordain nodded once and left, closing the door softly behind him. Elena picked up the key, turning it over in her hands. The iron was old, dark with age, etched with sigils that hurt to look at directly. He's right, you know. Once you use this, once you go into the field, everything changes. Everything's already changed. Cassian touched his neck, feeling the dark veins pulsing beneath his skin. I changed the moment I cast my first void flame. This is just following through. She set the key down and took his hands in hers. Her skin was warm against his, which had grown cold over the past 3 days. Promise me something. What? Promise that if this works, if you somehow manage to stop the Voidweaver without losing yourself completely, you'll try to come back, to who you were, to me. Her voice broke. Don't just accept the corruption as inevitable. Fight for yourself the way you're fighting for the kingdom. Cassian wanted to promise, wanted to tell her that he'd remain himself, that the darkness wouldn't consume him, that they'd have a future together after this was over. But the texts had been clear. The soul bond was permanent. The corruption was progressive, and he'd already lost memories he couldn't even identify as missing. I promised to try, he said, because that was the only truth he could offer. Elena pulled him into an embrace, and for a moment, Cassian let himself feel it, the warmth of human contact, the comfort of being held, the reminder that he was still, for now, a person capable of connection. Then she pulled back, wiping her eyes. All right, she said, let's go. If we only have 30 minutes before the archives seal, we need to move. We're not going to the archives, she frowned. But you said, I said I need to practice more, and I do. But Mordain gave us the key to the catacombs for a reason. The archives are about to be locked down, but the catacombs, those are where the original sealing happened, where 73 mages burned themselves to nothing, stopping the Voidweaver the first time. Understanding dawned in Elena's eyes. You think the catacombs hold something the archives don't, some remnant of what they did. I think if I'm going to face the same enemy they faced, I need to understand how they fought it. Not just the theory from books, but the practical reality of what they actually did. Cassian picked up the key. And I think Mordain knows that. Why else give me access to the place where it all happened? Elena grabbed her coat. Then we go to the catacombs. But Cassian, if this goes wrong, if the corruption accelerates beyond control, you'll do what's necessary. I know. He met her gaze. Thank you for being willing to bear that burden. They left the apartment together, descending into the waking city. Thornhaven was stirring to life, citizens beginning their daily routines, unaware that their world hung by a thread. Cassian watched them as he and Elena made their way toward the palace, the merchant opening his shop, the mother walking her child to school, the old man feeding pigeons in the square. All of them trusting that the wards would hold, that the mages would protect them, that tomorrow would come. He was going to make sure it did. Whatever the cost. The palace loomed ahead, its ancient stones intermingled with modern glass and steel. They entered through a side gate, using Cassian's Magister credentials to bypass the main security. Elena stayed close, her presence a steady anchor as they navigated the corridors toward the crypts. The entrance to the royal burial grounds was guarded by 2 palace sentries who checked their credentials with professional efficiency. Beyond the checkpoint, stone stairs descended into cool darkness. Witchlights flickered to life as they passed, casting dancing shadows on walls carved with the names and deeds of dead kings. The tomb of King Aldrich II stood at the far end of the main chamber, a massive sarcophagus of black marble, topped with the carved effigy of a stern-faced monarch. According to the inscription, he'd ruled during the original sealing, commanding the desperate working that had imprisoned the Voidweaver 3 centuries ago. Cassian studied the tomb, looking for the entrance Mordain had mentioned. Elena circled to the other side, running her hands along the carved stone. Here, she said, there's a seam, and these sigils, they're asking for a key. Cassian joined her, holding up the iron key. The sigils on the key matched those carved into the stone. He inserted it into a nearly invisible slot and turned. the tomb shuddered. Stone ground against stone as the sarcophagus slid aside, revealing a narrow staircase descending into absolute darkness. Cold air rushed up, carrying with it the scent of old magic and older death. Elena lit her focus crystal, and Cassian called a small mage light to his palm. Conventional magic still came easily, though it felt increasingly hollow compared to Voidflame's immediacy. Together, they descended into the catacombs beneath the palace, leaving the world of the living behind. The stairs seemed to go on forever, spiraling down into the earth. The walls were rough-hewn stone, unmarked except for occasional sigils that pulsed faintly as they passed. The air grew colder with each step, and Cassian's breath misted in the witchlight. Finally, they reached the bottom. The staircase opened into a vast, circular chamber, easily 100 feet across. The floor was marked with an intricate pattern of ritual circles and channeling lines, all converging on a central point. Around the perimeter stood 73 stone pillars, each carved with a name and a date. The names of the mages who had given everything to create the ceiling. Elena moved to the nearest pillar, reading aloud. Archmage Theron Silverlight died on the 7th day of the sealing, aged 42 years. His sacrifice preserved the kingdom. Cassian walked the circle, reading the names. Some had died on the first day, others had lasted weeks into the working. Only 5 pillars bore dates after the sealing's completion, and those 5 had additional inscriptions. Contained until the corruption consumed him, and mercy granted by royal decree. In the center of the chamber, where all the ritual lines converged, was a depression in the stone floor. It was stained black, and when Cassian knelt beside it, he could feel the residual magic. Not conventional power, but the distinctive wrongness of anathema-class workings. Void flame had burned here. A lot of it. For a very long time. This is where they stood, he said quietly. 73 mages, all channeling void flame simultaneously, all burning themselves as fuel. They stood here and destroyed themselves to create the ceiling. Elena knelt beside him. And now you're going to try to do the same thing. Alone. Not alone. Cassian looked at her. You're here, and that matters more than you know. She took his hand, and they sat together in the center of that ancient working, surrounded by the names of the dead. Above them, the kingdom prepared for a doomed conventional defense. Below, in the darkness, Cassian prepared to walk the same path that had consumed 73 heroes. And deep beneath the Shadow Veil wastes, the Voidweaver stirred in its weakening prison, sensing the echo of old magic awakening in the palace catacombs. It remembered this place, remembered the pain of being bound by 73 burning souls. And it wondered, with something approaching curiosity, whether one young mage, however determined, however corrupted, could possibly hope to match what had required so many. The entity decided to wait and see. After all, it had been patient for 3 centuries. A few more days would make little difference. And watching this particular weapon forge itself was proving unexpectedly entertaining.
Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures. Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures.